This show was originally recorded in July 2020. In this episode, I speak to Bill McAllister-Lovatt about the impact of good questioning on leadership and disruptive innovation. This is an interesting conversation on the nature of curious leadership and how good leaders use the power of questions in a crisis. Listen up to the rest of our conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Bill McAllister-Lovatt. Hi, Bill.
Hi, Judith. How are you?
I'm feeling good today. What about you?
Yes, we live in interesting times and every day is different.
That's true. Before we kick off, tell us about you.
Tell me about me. Well, that's interesting. I've lived and worked all over the world, looking at how to build teams in a different way, what questions to ask, and how leadership plays an important part in what we do. And given where we are at this moment in time, we need those possibilities and opportunities more than ever. So one of the key things I would look at is, how do you upgrade yourself and your team given the current situation? And where is that going to take you and your business in the future?
Well, that's interesting. There's quite a few things to unpick there. So tell me about upgrading your team. What does that mean?
It's interesting because there's a lot going on at the moment about people are working from home, people are working in the office, and that's changed. And that can frighten people. Like, what do you want me to change? I'm okay doing this. For me, if you upgrade yourself, it's a bit like Windows and Mac. You know, every week you're doing the same thing, but we're upgrading people to a different level in a way that's different from change, but it's not. It depends on your perspective. And that's what I find fascinating at the moment.
That does sound interesting. Do tell me more about that.
So basically, we can go on a course, we can go on a change course, a transformational course, and people are actually said, well, you can't do this unless you change. Mm-hmm. So you're being dismissed by actually what you're bringing to the table. And for me, it's almost like, what best practice have we got here? What's not working here? And actually, if you say, I'm going to upgrade you, you're actually bringing all the stuff you've got with you and not dismissing any of it, but actually taking it to a different level. That also depends on how the people you work with and for look at what you're going to do from an individual and a collective perspective. And that's what can create tension and disarray in a way.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how does the impact of good questioning work with leadership?
Good questioning is a really interesting question because it's a bit like, if I question everything you do, does that mean I don't think like you? It's like we're all in a team, so we all think the same and we all work the same. That team would not work for me. I used to employ people who were a bit like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or I used to employ people who were like Albert Einstein. They're at two different ends of the spectrum. They're at two different poles apart. But look what they're actually bringing, and they'll ask a question in a different way. The problem you have with teams is, I don't think like you, so I'm going to dismiss you. Mm-hmm. But it's like, what are you actually bringing? And I used to have so much fun actually saying, there's no question off the board here. Ask a question.
Well, Mavericks love asking questions, and they seek to ask a lot of questions because, one, the question is often more interesting than the answer. And two, it enables you to really get to the heart of things, because I think people are quite glib with what they know, and they don't really spend a lot of time digging deeper to find out how things really, really work. Do you see that?
Yes, because it's like you go into a meeting, I'm going to ask you a question, well, tell me what the answer is. Well, I can give you the answer, but then that probably closed off the question you really wanted to ask. So you've got this whole thing going on at the moment, right? Can we have a conversation? Can we have a discussion? A discussion is really quite interesting because it sounds almost in parallel like the word percussion. You know, I'm hitting someone because I want a discussion with you. When you're not on an equal footing, I'm almost beating you up to have a discussion for you to come to the meeting. Whereas if you're things like dialogue, where you've got this open space and saying, right, okay, here we are, put something in a bowl. Let's look at the bowl. Has the bowl changed the question? Or have you changed the question by where you are? And then it's like, let's have a look at this in a different way. And people will look at it in completely different ways, and they'll bring things into that. So actually, you're actually putting things together in a completely different way, and you're building a completely different system as well, because we all work in systems whether we understand it or not.
I definitely agree with the working in systems. I think it's a bit curious what you say about discussion, though. So if I said to somebody, let's have a discussion on this, what I mean is let's have an open and frank exchange of views, so we see where we are. That's what discussion means to me.
Okay, then. So let's take it one step back. Would the person who wants to have discussion with you understand where you're coming from? Because that's almost a question you're asking, isn't it? We're going to have a discussion. What does a discussion mean to you? I know what it means to me. So you're always asking a question about what discussion means to you. And some people assume they know what they're doing.
If I would put it in context, I always would. So I would say, because I know that I don't like going somewhere for a discussion or something and not knowing the purpose of it. So I would always provide that context as to why I wanted a discussion. Because I can see what you're saying, because I think used in the wrong hands, it can be an implied threat, I suppose, if that person has a higher authority. But that in itself would be counterintuitive if you're wanting to get a good result for something.
Oh yes, because you're bringing an explicit and implicit agenda to the discussion that you haven't even spoken about. Which is, oh, by the way, I'm coming here with this agenda, but I haven't told you what it is, but we're having a discussion. Sometimes it only needs to be, this is what we did. I mean, it's almost like you're having a contract. You're either going to have a verbal or a written contract. And given that we're all working remotely, no one's even discussing this. What are we going to actually talk about? What's on the table and what's not off the table? And then you have this equanimity in a way, which is really interesting from a remote working practice. So do you write a policy for that?
You know what, it's interesting, because to me it's just, I haven't actually even thought about it, because for me leadership's about being open and transparent. It's not about trying to get one over someone, especially if you're actually leading them. So for me it would be, let's discuss this, and because we're looking for X outcome. Or if I'm called into discussion with something and I don't know the context, I always ask for it. What's the purpose of the discussion? What's the outcome supposed to look like? I would either have that conversation before I got there or whilst I was in the meeting. But I suppose not everyone does that.
Well, no, I mean, isn't it interesting that someone, given what's happening at the moment, would I phone someone up and have a conversation about it? Or would someone send me an email to say, these are the key points we're going to talk about? And is that okay? So that's two differentiators, because having a conversation about it on the phone would be completely different from someone sending an email to you saying, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think I think it also sits in the context of your own leadership style. So if your leadership is one where people can predict your reactions to something, then So, for example, if someone's done something wrong or they've made a mistake, but they can predict that you would ask reasonable questions and you would seek the learning and you wouldn't be shifting the blame quickly, then you're more likely to find out about mistakes faster. So I think it probably would depend on people's intentions. So there's an example for you, I suppose, that highlights your point. Years and years and years ago, I was working at an organisation and they were going through redundancies for the first time. And whenever and it was an organisation where a lot of things happened. It was an open office, and there was no space for any private conversation. So they invariably happened in an office, in a glass office, because there was nowhere else to have a conversation. And then I noticed that sometimes people looked nervous when we had a quick meeting, and other times they didn't. And I asked one of my staff, why was that? And they said, well, they think if you're holding your notepad, it will be a redundancy conversation. And if you're not, it won't be. Which was a bit strange, because as a head of HR there, you would never have a redundancy conversation on your own with a member of staff anyway. It would always be with the manager. But that was a perception, which was easy to eradicate. But I suppose that comes down to context and knowing how things are. So once people understood that if there was going to be redundancy consultation, it would be done in a specific formal way, it was very easy to allay that fear.
Well, that's really interesting, because one of the questions I keep on, someone asked me last week, because I did some work on trust, and it's like, how do you do a performance appraisal on Zoom?
That's an interesting one. What was your response?
Well, it's interesting because there's two things, well, more than one thing come up. So basically, what relationship have you got for your boss who's doing this one-to-one? What would it look like if you went into a room, just as you said, oh, I've got this notepad. Oh, you're coming in for your performance appraisal today. It's all formalized. It's on a table. You're both sitting down at the table. You have all these forms in front of you, and you're given this and you're given feedback, and that could take quite a while. If that person's okay with that, that's fine. But if that person who's actually doing it like your boss isn't very comfortable with it, how do you transfer that to a Zoom conversation, which is could be even more upsetting and more nerve-wracking for the person who deliver it, and also for the person who's receiving it?
I suppose you've got outside distractions that you can't control. So I suppose if you're the manager, you don't know if the spouse or the children are also there. Who may or may not suddenly jump into the conversation and have an argument, I guess, if it's not going so well. And also a lot of people rely almost solely on visual clues, for example, and if they can't observe that, because there's nothing to say that the member of staff will have the video on, for example. And then that might make it difficult for those individuals. But I think it still comes down to context, in the sense of, how do you normally do it? You know, if by doing performance reviews normally are fine because you've planned them, you've got good relationships with your employees, then it should be no different from Zoom. It's probably only more difficult if you're in a situation where the leadership's poor or the person is unskilled.
Yes, absolutely. And would you record that performance review on Zoom? And who would own that? So basically, later on, if something came up 3 months later, would you go back to your recording and say, this is what you told me, and this is how I answered the question you asked? What would look like? Would that be contemporaneous? Would you have to go to HR and say, no, I didn't mean what I said there. Now it's been taken out of context when you're playing it back to me.
Gosh, I haven't thought of it. I wouldn't imagine recording it, because you don't record it in the office. Why would you? Because I think if you did that, you just add that extra layer of formality and suspicion. Do you know what I mean? Because if you call them into the office, you don't say, let me just get a video camera to record your responses. So why would you do it when they're at home? If anything, I think that's more obtrusive, I think.
Also, on one level, you're recording it visually by writing it in a form, right? So would you have a whiteboard where you're recording this in real time with the two people there? That was my question.
My answer would be no.
No.
But then that's maybe because I think when you read, I guess I suppose for some people, when they did reviews, they would write it down and then they would get them to sign immediately. Whereas my general practice would have been to take notes, then get that recorded for the person to view to make sure they're happy with it and then sign it. So again, it wouldn't. So I guess I suppose is Zoom a change, or by adding in Zoom, are you changing your current practices? So the question would be, if you are, what's the benefit of doing that, and what's the reason for doing that, and what's the disadvantages of doing that? But if the Zoom is to provide the leader with more protection, then the way you've been doing it in the past is probably all wrong.
Yes, and I think given what's happened with Zoom, and it's going to be, I don't like the new norm because it doesn't really exist. It's a bit like, what is the policy and procedure? What is actually working with Zoom? What's not working with Zoom? And would HR bring out a whole policy on this is how we talk and convey our messages to our team on Zoom? Because given that Zoom is dynamic and a policy is static, you have a conflict of interest there straight away.
I imagine once things stabilise and remote working settles down into whatever it settles down into, there'll be a whole slew of policies will come out, because that's the nature of work, isn't it?
Yes. And I think it's fantastic because I know people who want to go back into the office straight away. They can't cope with Zoom. They can't cope with working at home. There's no proper structure for them working at home. They love the office. They love the social interaction. So maybe we have to go through a blended process, come into the office once a week and meet 2 or 3 people. That'd be fine. And then you can work remotely. So, yes. I mean, there was an announcement in the paper today. Some employee, I think it's in America, 20,000 I'll be working in the office till the middle of next year now. I'm not too sure who it was. One of the big American companies, yes.
That will prove interesting. I think some companies lend themselves to remote working quite well, whereas others don't. And I think there are very few companies at present who can factor in all that kind of innovation and creativity of people bumping into each other onto a Zoom call.
Well, it's just like, the water cooler moment. You go into a meeting for 2 hours. Where does all the work get done? Do you want to sit down and have a cup of coffee? Because now I want to ask the question I daren't ask in the team meeting.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was younger, I remember working in an office. I remember working in an organisation where, again, there wasn't no meeting room. So a lot of the senior team meetings took place in sort of quiet restaurants because they're empty because it's not during lunchtime. And sometimes it could be a good 4 hours where people would, because it was close to the office, would come down, have the meeting, go back. And the amount of work that was done away from the distraction of the phone ringing, away from emails and away from all that, was probably 1 4-hour stint there is probably 2 days in the office.
Yes, I mean what I've found now, I'm getting up earlier in the morning and not looking at any emails, not looking at any phones, and getting some work done, and it's far more productive. But then people are actually saying, well, if you're Zooming not at your computer, you're not working. Why aren't you working? Because I have a life, and it's about that conversation again. This is what you want me to do. Does it matter if I've done it at 2 o'clock in the morning when I feel there's quiet and there's no distraction and I can still get it to you? These are the big questions that are being asked at the moment. And some that's a really good leadership question. Do I trust you to do this? And can you deliver on what you're supposed to be delivering?
And you need more protection for the employees, because I think, I work for myself. I got up at 5 this morning to do some work, and I'm tired now. And I remember thinking, can I stop after I've recorded this podcast, or should I continue? And it's like, don't be so silly. You're tired. Call it a day. When it's finished, go and have a lie down. You're allowed. And it's really funny that, even whilst working for myself, I'm still thinking, there's still quite a few hours left in the day. It's a bit wrong to finish now. Well, I'm thinking, well, I've been up since 5 working really hard.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, once we're finished, I'm going out for a walk in the garden. That's it.
Really, yeah, it's really, really important. So I know that some of the things that you talk about is things like flipping the leadership hierarchical structure upside down. So tell me a bit more about that.
So basically, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which everybody knows, you know, you've got your needs, you've got your 4 needs where you need it, and then you go on to the higher level of awareness and transcendence. So basically, at the moment, everyone's trying to survive. They're down at the bottom of the triangle. You know, have I got enough food, water, money? Can I do this? How do I get up to that level? So basically, the old model would always think, well, to get to the top of the level and to get to this leadership, you need to be an executive, you need to be an MBA, you need to have worked all over the world, you've done this. My question would be, from a leader point of view, if you flip that triangle, I'll use the analogy like, if the building's on fire, you wouldn't ask the CEO where the fire marshal is. The fire marshal would come and be a leader in that moment in time and actually say, I know everybody who's in the building, I know who's on each floor, and I know how to save those people's lives and how to get them out of the building. So this is what I'm really thinking about. And that's a true form of leader and leadership at that moment in time. And we sometimes dismiss those people because they haven't gone up that hierarchy. So what if you flipped it? And at that moment in time, this person becomes the leader because they actually have the tools and the inclination and the knowledge and the know-how to say, right, this is what I'm doing.
But do you need a big hierarchy, though, for an organisation to survive?
Well, there's 2 forms of hierarchy. There are growth hierarchies and the dominant hierarchies. Dominant hierarchies, mainly, if you use a triangulation method, that's what it looks like. You know, you've got layers and layers of management, you know, bottom, middle, senior, and then that. In a growth hierarchy, it's about what do I put into this jigsaw at that moment in time to actually deliver what I'm doing. So I use the analogy of the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef is wonderful with all the corals, with all the infrastructure from the micro to the macro, and they all work together. When the reef isn't working, there's a space made and another form of infrastructure ecosystem comes in and joins it to that part of the jigsaw. And that's what I look at. I look at how would you build a team if you use an ecosystem? Who's coming in and out of the jigsaw at any moment in time to deliver what they can't? They come out and then someone else fills that space. And that person's part of the jigsaw is not wasted. It's actually looked after in a different way.
Interesting. So are you saying then that teams in their general normal working aren't static, so that when something comes together, you pull together whatever resource you need to do, throw them together, some will stay and some will go? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I can give you a good example. So I was working for a large company, and we had a power cut, right? A JCB had gone through a power cable and took the building down. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call to say we have to come in now, this is happening. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, we said, right, what's happening? So within 5 minutes, we pulled a team together. This is what we have to do. We went round and told everybody what we were doing, what we weren't doing, and please don't disturb us. Please don't send us an email or a phone call because it won't work. And we had the building up and running within 36 hours. Because we pulled the people in who we knew could actually deliver this. And we had to get the outside people in to fix the power cable. But at the same time, we made sure that what was happening in the building through lack of electricity and lack of computers. And we managed to contact our customers to say, this is what's happening with a major power outage through no fault of our own. We'll get back up and running as soon as we can. And then every hour, we had a quick 5 minutes to find out what was going on. People would come over and say, right, we've got this sorted, that sorted. So we basically got a room, completely emptied the whole room and put almost like a blank sheet of paper and a plan up. This is what we have to do on an hourly basis. That's the way it was working, what we've achieved and what we haven't achieved. And it was wonderful and it all worked. And none of us slept for 36 hours. And that was the beauty of pulling everybody in who you knew, but also you told people This is what we're doing. Don't come and ask us these questions because we can't answer them. And then if you told the staff what was going on, they were fine.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Again, many years ago, I was head of HR in one of the large supermarkets, and for some reason, the entire rest of the senior team and then middle management team were all rotated off on a busy Saturday morning, which was madness. Anyway, I remember coming in, going into HR, to do what you're doing, and I was thinking it's a bit quiet, it's a bit quiet around here. And then one of the very junior managers came in and said, "Just so that you know, you're the most senior person in the store right now." I was like, "Oh, okay." So, and he goes, "And what you are the most senior person, just so that you know," this is something like, I don't know, 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning or something like that. It was, "We have no bread and we have no milk," which was a Saturday morning. And at the time, it was one of the busiest trading days. And what I did was like, fine, okay, HR shut today. Called all the assistant heads into the office for a meeting. I want everyone to come with what's happening in the department. And everyone just looked at me like, "You're HR, what are you talking about? You're not a trader." And I went down the shop floor and just walked around the shop to have a really good look, just to look round, what staff's present, what does the shop look like, and all this kind of stuff. And then when we came, and it was really interesting because when we came up, at that point, people accepted that I was the most senior person, but they didn't respect that I would be able to do anything about it. Do you know what I mean? Because they were like sniggering and kind of, because I was also I think I'd only been in post for probably a month and a half or something, so they didn't really know me very well. And I just literally went around all the heads and said, listened to what was happening, and I started moving people's staff around. I was saying, "Okay, close down that department because that's not necessary right now. Move over here. Let's do this. Let's do that. This, that. Right, let's go. We'll have another relook at this in an hour and a half." And it all got fixed. And it's funny enough, on that day, we actually made profit on the Saturday rather than a huge loss. And it was my standing in the store completely changed from that point on. And it was, as you said, it was that just kind of emergent leader that said, "Right, which is pretty bad. We're starting the busy Saturday, badly trading, and none of the senior team's going to be in again until 12 or 1 or something like that. So it's, someone has to take control. I'm going to do it." And I literally, until the rest of the staff, senior team came in, I just walked the floor, moving staff, and saying, "Right, you on tills, you on grocery," and just dealing with the whole situation. And then when the managers came back, I had some talk about who they leave in charge when they're not around. So we wouldn't go in that situation again. But again, it was that as a leader, you just need to step up and take charge when the situation calls for it.
Absolutely. What was really interesting there is so how did people view you after that? How did their perspective of you change after that situation?
They realised that I actually understood how the store worked, how the trading worked. That I wasn't just a HR person who could talk people. I knew once they started telling me about, the questions I was asking, how's bakery doing on week sales, and what's going on here, and actually being able to interpret live what's happening and how to shift resources around so that sales could increase and the rest of it. I was respected because the previous HR person was just a HR person, and I think I was respected a lot more and was able to do more within the store because I had chosen to stood up and not just panicked and run around and gone, "Oh no, what are we going to do?" Even to the point I remember actually phoning a store manager in a local store that I knew fairly well to say, "We've run out of milk. I have no idea what happens next." And he just said, "Oh, just do this." I go, "Seriously, I have no idea." And he went, "I'll order it for you." You know, so there were aspects of the trading that I was unable to deal with because I didn't know I knew how to manage, but I didn't know how to do the tactical stuff. But I knew the right people, and then, and he just sorted it all out. But it wasn't like, I suppose, what the staff saw was someone take control whilst preparing not to be worried or panicked on the situation.
But what you did, the last thing you said was you phoned someone up and asked them a question.
Yeah.
Because you didn't know what and a lot of people get into a panic situation. I know everything I'm doing, fine, it's with me, and then it all collapses because they're not prepared to say, "I'm sorry, I don't know about this. Who's the best person to talk to about this? Yes, this, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you come and explain? Can I question what you're doing? Right, where are we going to take this?" And did you use that as a model later on in anywhere else? Because that'd be really interesting, like almost a best practice situation. This is what happened and this is what we did.
I think it's probably the way I managed with that was a consequence of a best practice model, in the sense that every organisation when I used to work in corporate, every organisation I went into, I always did an appreciation. So I always went round to understand how things worked and asked great questions like, what's the impact of this? What happens if the ordering system goes down? What happens? So, and also when we used to have trading meetings, I'd pay attention, listen to the questions that people asked, listen to what the responses were. And I made it my business to understand how a retailer traded. And I think that was so it wasn't like that was the beginning of further a new model. It was more the results of the effort and the business practice I've put in place already. Because as a manager, I already had an idea of how the store had been trading to that point anyway, because I made it my business to know. And I think that's one of the things about Mavericks, that Mavericks have a collection of specialisms. They don't just go deep and narrow in one area. They look to see what the adjacent areas of knowledge need to be, and then continue expanding that until they have like a patchwork quilt of specialisms that can make a difference. So whilst I was walking around the store, I could see from level of shelving and time of day and what's happening in the store whether somebody had to move from X department over there to make sure that happened. I think what people don't realise as well is that retail is far more complicated than it appears to be.
Yes, I mean, and what you spoke about there is, we've got a complex system of buying a pint of milk. If you look at the journey of a pint of milk, it's absolutely incredible. But underneath that, each part of that process, it's got its own system, and everything is interconnected, like a team. And when one bit doesn't work, then as you had to do, by the way, we've got no milk, but actually it came from the cow, it was processed, it went into a carton and delivered to the store. Where did that part of the system break down? It was the last part, because you didn't have a delivery. You had to go and look at another delivery system for another store and say, "Can you help?" And that's what it's about. Yeah.
I thought it's recognising that milk's a staple, which, if people can't get milk in a supermarket, they'll leave and go to another supermarket, and they may not come back. And that multiplies thousands of pounds compared to someone not being able to buy something inconsequential. So it's a good example. When I was walking around the store, there was somebody who was filling out newspapers and magazines and stuff, and I said, "Can you stop that now and go over to the tills, please?" And they argued with me. It was quite interesting because they argued with me and said, "But my manager, who wasn't there, said I have to do this by this." I said, "It's not important right now. You need to come till." And then it was really interesting because they were arguing, and I said, "Sorry, there's a choice. I can send you home, as a disciplinary offence, or you can go on the tills. It's one or the two, but I don't have time to argue right now." Whereas I would, if it was a situation that didn't have the sense of urgency that it had, it would have been a far different conversation. In that moment, it was, we need this to be resolved, because everything kind of triggers. Just like when you start off with, someone can't, the tills aren't opened enough, and then it just triggers and triggers, and it just fits around the whole store. You see what I mean? So it was an interesting time. I would have said that beforehand, I wouldn't have known how to run a flagship retail store on the busiest morning of the month. But I think by doing that provides some resilience, because you've got the success of that, which you use the success of that in maybe another company, another industry.
Well, you could have got them to fold up the newspapers into a carton, and you can go and get the milk from somewhere else. Which we used to do as kids. We used to do that as kids, you know.
Yeah, but we're talking about not having pallets and pallets of milk on the first thing on a Saturday morning. We're not talking about there's 3 pints that are missing.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, and also I think at the time I was something like 25 or 26 as well, you know, so it wasn't as if, and I started senior sort of management at 24, so it wasn't as if I had years of managerial experience to fall back on either, so it wasn't a bad achievement, I guess, all in all.
Well, no, I mean, and you and I both know, we've seen people saying, well, I'm just walking out because I can't cope. You know, people walking out and saying, no, this is just too much, I'm just overwhelmed. And it's like, well, how can I help the situation? And they can't see anything there, and that must be really, you know, quite upsetting for them. When actually it's like, we all work in a system. What's the bit that's the way I look at it now. There's a bit missing from this jigsaw. Who can we go to help us with this piece of the jigsaw that's missing?
Yeah, because I know that questions is your thing, isn't it? Making sure people ask better questions, and I think that's why I think that you can manage almost any department if you know the right questions, and you can interpret the questions. I mean, I've been in situations before where I've had to manage an IT department because, you know, the IT manager's left, there's nobody else capable of doing it, and then you'll have to, you know, recruit one. And I remember, you know, managing fine because I knew the questions to ask the IT team. So you could follow like a logical progression, and then you can end up with a result with, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. I still don't understand why you can't do it. And I actually remember somebody come up to me and say, the IT team want to know where you learned so much about IT. And it's like, I just can follow the way that their answers, and I know they're not telling me the truth, so I'm going to keep digging until I find out why it's not done. But what was interesting, that then meant that the team ended up being a really highly productive team, because they got used to expecting to perform rather than saying, oh, system says no.
Yes, it's interesting that in certain sectors, people are actually upgraded, I use that word carefully, because they've been successful in one department. And on some levels, you can transfer some of that. But if you don't ask the question, or actually, but I've just been, you know, parachuted in to do this, and this is what we're going to do, but you've never asked me what I do. You know, you've got a team structure on a piece of A4 paper, and that's what it looks like, but you haven't actually sat down with people for 5 minutes. You know, tell me what you do, tell me what you don't do, and tell me what the team does. And then it just doesn't work, and it happens a hell of a lot.
Yeah, because I think every company has its own terminology and its own meaning. So, you know, a HR advisor in one company is very junior grade, and in another it could be the most senior grade that there is. So you don't really know until you ask those questions. Tell me more about the disruptive innovator.
Oh, that came to me in a dream about 10 years ago. 3 o'clock in the morning, I always have notebooks by the side of my bed, and I went, I'm going to have to look at what this means, you know, because I've actually worked in innovation all over the world, and a lot of it doesn't work because all we're doing is tweaking something that's failing. Whereas from
not
a disruption,
innovation, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, there's a really good book written by 2 blokes who said innovation doesn't work, which is really interesting. But I think if you disrupt, and one of the key things for me was when I was working, you know, in Europe and America, it was a bit like, give me the tool and the structure so I can go and do this. But you must be mindful, this may not look like what I said it would look like when we get to the end of whatever we're going to do. And the hardest question I ever had to ask is, will you let me go and do it? And don't let me get flummoxed by all these other people who are coming saying, can you do this in a formal way? When actually disruption and innovation, in its true sense, is completely and unpredictably informal. So you've got 2 people on, I want a rational, logical point of view, but this feels right to go with it. Can we go with it? What's it going to look like? Well, I've actually been going down the motorway and I'm now going off an A road, a B road, and there's no road. But my goodness, look what's showing up. And that's the biggest question on leadership we have. Are you prepared to allow me to take this risk? And that's where I come from now. Can you allow me to do this? And if not, then the conversation is closed.
Wouldn't that not depend on how much you're trusted and what your own reputation is?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And I had bosses who said, right, Bill, I'll go and deal with the board and you get on with the work, which was wonderful. And other people said, well, can you tell me how many pencils you've bought this week? How many pieces of sellotape you've bought this week? You know, how many... And I went, well, actually, I'm doing something which is really quite random. Yes, we know that. But I need to know from my spreadsheet that what you're actually doing and what value, and this is one of the key questions that comes up time and time again, what value are you bringing to the business? Well, in business, there are 7 multiple bottom lines, and money is only one of them. And guess what we concentrate on? Money.
What's the consequences of doing that, do you think?
Of doing what?
Concentrating solely on the money.
Oh, you've lost the plot. It's a bit like I'm waiting to win the lottery, but I've walked down the road and tripped over a £5 note that I missed. So you've got this thing, I'm looking at that. And basically look at the value. So at the moment, people are saying they're working from home, they've got a better life. My social interaction with, family, teams and individuals, but somebody wants to monetize that. I mean, there was a great paper written in 2007 by Layard, the economics of healthcare. And he did something which is really interesting, like the cost of not doing it, the cost of not putting a garden in a hospital grounds. People look better, they look out at a tree, their health and well-being's better. But how do we cost that? So someone's owning the money. Someone's got the key to the safe, right? And it's about asking them to open the safe to give you the money in a different way. That's some of the fundamental questions. And it's like people are asking for money at the moment, but they want an outcome to see what value they've brought.
Yeah, that reminds me of something actually, because whenever I used to have to do budgets, I always used to add the opportunity cost of stuff. And I remember working in a really large global organisation, and we were told, prepare your budget, but we're expecting it to still be X% less than last year's budget. Anyway, so I prepared my budget, and it was a reasonable cost, but I had all this other stuff in the budget. So I had things like, bear in mind I was head of HR, so I had a welfare budget. So I calculated what I thought would be reasonable things for managers to be able to give or to do with their staff for over a period of time. And I also had obviously a departmental budget where I'd done something similar. And I remember that my boss, the director, came to me and said, "You are one of the most irritating managers I've ever had." I was like, "Why is that then?" And you go, "I want to cut your budget, but every time I look on every single line, you give me a reason why it's there, and I can't justifiably cut it because, it's all sound reasoning." He was going, "I find it really annoying." And he goes, "I even want to cut your welfare budget, but you've given me the opportunity what the cost is if I don't have it." And he goes, "So you're the only manager who's going to have 100% of their budget." And I thought that was really funny. And I was really surprised to find that the others hadn't done something similar.
Yes, I mean, again, it's about the value and the cost of not doing it. It's just unbelievable because the costs don't come up straight away. They come downstream and they manifest themselves in completely different ways that people haven't even thought of.
Yeah, and also it does require innovation, because I went back to providers and renegotiated deals and got 20% off here and whatever, switched providers. And so it wasn't as if I was like, I'm not going to do anything. But I thought that there were certain things that were important, like the ability for a manager to take a member of staff out for a coffee, if they felt it was warranted. But then that had a cost, it was that kind of thing. But yeah, it was interesting to see that his reasoning, which was, I wanted to cut your budget, but you have not given me any ability to cut it because your budget, your budget notes are so detailed that I can see the value of every item on it. So that was a really good lesson learned for me as well for going in other organisations.
Because you probably triggered something in that person that they didn't like seeing, but they knew it worked.
Well, yeah, but it also meant that it left a mark for the other managers, because they hadn't considered the person. Bearing in mind, this again was, I don't know, 15 plus years ago. They hadn't considered the well-being of their employees, even so much to say, I expect during the year there must be at least 3 times that somebody in your department would have done something especially great. Here's some money that you should have to do something about that. It's that kind of, I never even thought I might want to be able to do that.
Yes, I remember, it's funny you say that, taking a colleague out for a cup of coffee. And I said, I'm going to claim this in our expenses. And 2 coffees were £3.50, right? Mm. So I put it all in, put the cost code in, everything. And they came back and said, yes, it's okay, we'll pay you the £3.50. And I went, how much does it cost to administer that? £7.54. I rest my case.
See, the staff used to love me, actually, because me being the Maverick, because I recognised my young staff and what motivated them. So really, really good work got a bottle of expensive champagne. But my team was very productive.
Well, yes, it's really interesting, that how do you reward someone? It was a great example in Asia that all these clients were doing really good. And this guy said, the best person to do this is going to get a laptop. I think it was worth $1,000. So they all did this. And then at the end of the year, this person got a laptop and they all went to clap their hands. And the next day, the guy sold it. And his boss said, why did you sell it? He said, well, you don't pay me enough money to live. So I sold my laptop so I could feed my family and send my daughter to school.
Oh my gosh!
And that's what he did. That's
heartbreaking.
So it's a bit like the value stream, isn't it? No, I'm going to give you a yacht. Well, I don't want a yacht. I'll sell the yacht so I can do something for my family. So where the bottle of champagne worked for you, it's a bit like, what do I give the team? So everybody in that team collectively would like a bottle of champagne because it's celebrate with the team. But individually, somebody might want something different. Somebody might want, £5 a book token or something else. And that's really where it all starts. That's where the really good leadership thing starts. By the way, I'm going to give you this. No, I don't need this, but this will actually work at my life at this moment in time.
And that's right. Yeah, I used to, because I had a whole kind of hierarchy of stuff. So it might be, here's some time for you and your friends to go for lunch. We are as a company is giving you money to take your friends to lunch, or let's go out and just have a coffee, or so it was all lots of different things, and it was also unexpected, so it was never used as the reward for something. It wasn't, if you do this you'll get that. It was more of a case of catching when someone did something exceptional and saying, this is what I'd like to give for you. It's that, you're right, but I just can't imagine how that boss must have felt to know that someone needed to use that expensive gift to feed their family. It must have been very difficult.
Yes. And then they said, right, look, this reward system's different. And actually the company changed the reward system, which was really interesting. And they actually looked at what they could do from an individual and community point of view. Mm. And in the end, they built a school for the kids with all the money would have spent on stuff, which was pretty nebulous on one level. And the staff said, this is what we really wanted. And that all worked, and the production of the staff went out, exponentially. It was wonderful.
Sounds great. I think that's a good place to stop. But before I do that, is there anything that I should have asked you that you wished I had done?
No, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
Welcome. So would you come back again, Bill, on another subject?
Absolutely.
So, thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Bill as much as I enjoyed having it. We improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute. To find out more about this, please contact me by emailing Judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you. Also, if you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. And finally, if you would like to work with us or just interested in finding out more about the Maverick at work, check out our website maverickparadox.co.uk.